This video is part 1 of a 2-part video essay series. Part 1 talks about Haruki Murakami's recurring theme of the oppressive social system and contains spoilers for the books Kafka on the Shore, A Wild Sheep Chase, Norwegian Wood, After Dark, South of the Border, West of the Sun, and the short story The Elephant Vanishes, all written by author Haruki Murakami. In part 2, I make the argument that Murakami's 1995 political shift is actually more of a gradual shift that starts in the 1980s, and I explore how his shift develops his own perspective involving the oppressive social system. The second video is where I make all the important key points, but this first video is vital for understanding the second video, so please watch this video first. Also, the second video contains spoilers for all the same books as the first, as well as Dance 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 and the Wind Up Bird Chronicle. Although, truthfully, I feel like it's kind of difficult to spoil Murakami's books considering that they make little sense whether you read them or not. Either way, feel free to read the books before watching this video. As a warning, the introduction to the essay contains semi-graphic descriptions of animal abuse, so if you're sensitive to this topic, please skip past it using the timestamps of the video. Lastly, while non-descriptive, this video also includes discussions around physical and sexual abuse, as well as suicide, so please proceed with caution. So this introduction part might be a little long, but bear with me because I swear there's a point to all this.
An old man is led by an intimidating black dog into a large house in a residential neighborhood. The old man is named Nakata, and he came here in search of a lost cat he was hired to find, named Goma. Nakata is not very bright, but he is okay with that, because if he were, the governor would no longer send him a monthly subsidy to live off of. Nakata follows the dog into a study room where he meets a man in a tall black hat. The man introduces himself as Johnny Walker, based off of the mascot of the whiskey company. However, Nakata knows this man as the cat catcher because a cat named Kawamura told him so. And yes, Nakata can talk to cats. It's what makes him so good at his job after all. Johnny Walker has the dog lead Nakata to a large fridge. Nakata opens the fridge to find a number of severed cat heads, but does not see Goma's. Nakata returns to Johnny Walker, who admits to killing all these cats, but explains that he is not doing so for some perverted thrill. Instead, he kills them to collect their souls so he can make a flute, and then he'll use that flute to collect even larger souls. Nakata does not understand this very well, but goes along as though he does. And Johnny Walker continues to explain that he is actually about to begin his next batch of cat soul siphoning, and confirms that Goma, the cat Nakata is searching for, is among them. Recognizing that Nakata can't very well take Goma's head back to the family that hired him to find the cat, Johnny Walker offers Nakata a trade. Truthfully, I'm sick and tired of this life. I've lived a long, long time. I don't even remember how old I am, and I don't feel like living any longer. I'm sick and tired of killing cats. But as long as I live, that's what I have to do. Murder one cat after another and harvest their souls, following things in the correct order, step 1 to step 10. And finally back to 1 again. It's an endless repetition, and I've had it. Nobody respects what I'm doing, and it doesn't make anybody happy. But the whole thing's all fixed already. I can't just suddenly say I quit and stop what I'm doing. And taking my own life isn't an option. That's already been decided too. There are all sorts of rules involved. So if I want to die, I have to get somebody else to kill me. That's where you come in. I want you to fear me, to hate me with a passion, and then terminate me. First you fear me, then you hate me, and finally, you kill me. Confused, Nakata questions why Johnny Walker needs Nakata to kill him. He doesn't want to do it, and he doesn't even think he can do it. But Johnny Walker continues to insist, explaining that life is not about what you want to do, but what others want you to do. He uses the analogy of a soldier sent to war. They don't want to kill anyone, but they have to, because the government said so. Nakata's situation is the same. However, he's still not convinced. He doesn't even know how to kill someone after all. Johnny Walker recognizes Nakata's inexperience and decides to give Nakata a demonstration. He pulls a paralyzed cat out of a nearby case and explains that he has 5 cats in the case, each injected with a paralysis drug. He clarifies that the drug is not anesthetic, so the cats are fully awake and can clearly feel pain. Johnny Walker intends to kill the cats one by one, finishing with Goma. He will cut open their chest, extract their heart, and then saw off their head. There will be unimaginable pain, and Nakata will have to watch until he decides to kill Johnny Walker. While Johnny Walker admits to feeling bad about this, he explains there's nothing he can do because these are the rules. It's either I kill the cats or you kill me. There is no other choice. Johnny Walker whistles hey-ho from Snow White while preparing his tools on a nearby table, and then takes the cat and lays it out over the surface. Without hesitation, he cuts a long incision along the cat's stomach and reaches into its chest, pulling out a small beating heart. After a brief display to Nakata, Johnny Walker swallows the tiny heart, visibly savoring the taste and sensation. He saws the cat's head off and pulls out the next cat to mutilate. Going by the same process, Johnny Walker continues to whistle while he kills the next cat, Nakata watching in horror as the cat fails to let out a scream before its heart is torn out. Nakata starts to feel strange. His vision changes and his neck starts to hurt, but he continues to watch as Johnny Walker pulls out a third cat. This time, Nakata recognizes the cat as Kawamura, the one who told him about Johnny Walker in the first place. Somehow knowing of their relationship, Johnny Walker teases Nakata, insisting Nakata stop him sooner rather than later. Without hesitation, Johnny Walker slits open Kawamura's stomach, but the drug fails, and Kawamura is able to let out a final screech before he dies. Nakata tries to close his eyes, but Johnny Walker insists that he continue to watch. It's part of the rules, after all. Johnny Walker finishes with Kawamura's body and pulls out a beautiful Siamese cat. Her name is Mimi, and she helped Nakata find Johnny Walker a few days prior. The Top Hat cat killer continues to taunt Nakata, commenting on how difficult the intelligent Mimi was to catch. Johnny Walker. From deep inside himself, Nakata manages to force out the words in a low voice. Please stop it. If you don't, Nakata's going to go crazy. I don't feel like myself anymore. So, you're no longer yourself, Johnny Walker says carefully and quietly. That's very important, Mr. Nakata. A person not being himself anymore. Johnny Walker continues the thought as he cuts the back of his hand, dripping blood over Mimi's trembling body. You're no longer yourself. That's the ticket, Mr. Nakata. Wonderful. The most important thing of all. Oh, full of scorpions is my mind. Macbeth again. Without a word, Nakata stands up. No one, not even Nakata himself, can stop him. With long strides, he walks over to the desk and grabs what looks like a steak knife. Grasping the wooden handle firmly, he plunges the blade into Johnny Walker's stomach, piercing the black vest, and then stabbing again in another spot. He can hear something, a loud sound, and at first doesn't know what it is, but then he understands. Johnny Walker is laughing. Stabbed in the stomach and chest, his blood spouting out, he continues to laugh.
The described scene is from the book海辺のカフカ, or Kafka on the Shore, written by author Haruki Murakami. If you had no idea what was happening, that's totally alright, welcome to Murakami. I chose this scene not because of its shockingly grotesque nature, nor its confusing surreal plotline, although the latter is the signature style of Murakami's. Rather, I chose it to ask you a question. Who is in control of Nakata's actions in killing Johnny Walker? Who is to blame for the murder? Is it Nakata? Is it Johnny Walker? Is it someone or something else entirely? While I won't tell you the answer to that question just yet, keep it in mind because we'll get back to it in a second. In 2009, Murakami received the Jerusalem Prize for the Freedom of the Individual and Society and was asked to make an appearance in Israel to receive his award. A Japanese pro-Palestine group requested that he not accept the prize in order to protest for the Palestinians, who are being denied their freedom and dignity as human beings. In response, Murakami stated, quote, "When I was asked to accept this award, I was warned from coming here because of the fighting in Gaza. I asked myself, is visiting Israel the proper thing to do? Will I be supporting one side? And so I gave it some thought, and I decided to come. Like most novelists, I like to do the exact opposite of what I'm told. It's in my nature as a novelist, so I chose to see. I chose to speak here rather than to say nothing." In continuing his speech, he related human beings to eggs. Quote, "If there is a hard, high wall, and an egg that breaks against it, no matter how right the wall or how wrong the egg, I will always stand on the side of the egg. Why? Because each of us is an egg, a unique soul enclosed in a fragile shell. Each of us is confronting a high wall. The high wall is a system which forces us to do things we would not ordinarily see fit to do as individuals. We have no hope against the wall. It's too high, too dark, too cold. To fight the wall, we must join our souls together for warmth and strength. We must not let the system control us, shape who we are. It is we who created the system." End quote. So I don't know how many of you guys were picturing this silly guy when you heard him talking about an egg and a wall, but unlike the story of Humpty Dumpty, where the egg is a monarch sitting on top of the wall of an oppressive regime, Murakami focuses on the fragility of the egg as an individual in contrast to the oppression of the wall as the system. In this way, his quote is very important because it perfectly illustrates a central theme of his writing. the lack of individual agency under an oppressive social system. Now, what do I mean when I say an oppressive social system? In this, I refer to the systems which construct and control our daily lives. In Murakami's novels, he often criticizes specifically the oppressive, economic-focused capitalist systems of modern Japan. But I leave this statement vague because not all oppressive social systems are economic, and I encourage each person to consider what systems in their life control them. Is it gender norms, economic pressure to take a certain job, or social pressure to marry by a certain age? Any of these things count, and while often focused on economic systems, Murakami's criticisms extend beyond just that. It is through this lens of the oppressive social system that I would like to revisit the previous scene from Kafka on the Shore. When the scene is considered from the perspective of agency, both Nakata and Johnny Walker have little to no control over this situation. Nakata is forced to observe as the cats are brutally murdered, taking no action until he eventually kills Johnny Walker. Yet even the act of killing Johnny Walker is done against his will. Nakata never wanted to kill the man in the top hat, but, quote, becomes someone other than himself, and is unable to stop it from happening. Outside of the scene as well, Nakata lacks agency. Due to his mental deficiency, he passively lives off of subsidies from the government, and only does anything when others tell him to. But this lack of agency is not a product of his mental deficiency. If he were to suddenly become smart, he would lose the subsidy and be forced to do the bidding of whoever hires him and the system he functions in. Johnny Walker's character proves this. He is perfectly mentally capable, if not outright intelligent. Yet, while on the surface it may appear to the reader that Johnny Walker is in control, he continues to insist that he does not want to do what he is doing, but must because of these unexplained rules. Even though he orchestrates the events of the scene to accomplish his goal, ultimately his goal seems to be controlled by some external malevolent force. Therefore, Johnny's only act of defiance to the system is to die. There is an argument to be made that the lack of agency in Kafka on the Shore is because fate controls their actions, hence the Macbeth reference. However, in many of Murakami's novels, he seems to use fate or prophecies or other unforeseeable forces of control as an allegory for the social systems that we as individuals cannot see. This lack of individual agency under the oppressive power of an all-controlling, all-encompassing social system appears in every work by Murakami I have read to date. While the method through which this social system controls its individuals varies by book, Murakami uses the many ways in which it manifests to criticize aspects he feels are present in modern Japanese society. So before I continue with this essay, I want to provide some background on Murakami for those of you unfamiliar with his work. Haruki Murakami is an award-winning modern Japanese novelist, most known by his works Norwegian Wood, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, 1Q84 or Ichikyu-84, and many more. Despite minor criticism for his political themes and misogynistic undertones, he is generally regarded as one of the most prominent Japanese authors alive today, particularly in the West, from which he draws a lot of inspiration. On this, I actually kind of want to mention that he's kind of a standout among Japanese authors. He refers to himself as the black sheep of modern Japanese literature because he tends not to fit in with other authors, and he even seems to intentionally distance himself from the image of a Japanese author. I just find that very interesting. Anyways, his books are often science fiction or fantasy, but usually take place in modern Japan. It is his common use of magical realism and his surreal writing style that often give his books that confusing but unique, like fever dream feeling. Furthermore, his protagonists are undoubtedly influenced by his personal life experiences. On a surface level, this is apparent because his characters often work in the same professions as he did in the past. The protagonist of Norwegian Wood attends the same university Murakami studied at and works at a record shop, the same first job as Murakami. Similarly, after graduation, Murakami opened a jazz bar and ran it with his wife for 7 years, just like the protagonist of South of the Border, West of the Sun. However, the similarities go much deeper than that. Murakami almost always writes from the perspective of a first-person I, or boku, protagonist, a trend in Japanese literature referred to as the I novel. In many cases, the protagonist is legitimately nameless, only ever referred to as boku, which is the Japanese masculine equivalent of the English I pronoun. In other cases, the protagonist is given a name but continues to follow the character archetype. This protagonist is usually a politically apathetic, middle-aged Japanese man feeling discontent and directionless with his repetitive daily life in post-World War II economically driven Japanese society. He feels he has little control over the outcome of events in his life. He sees himself as unbearably ordinary or plain, but despite all this, he's almost always fairly popular with women. While I cannot say whether or not Murakami himself possesses the ordinary riz of his protagonist, the similarities between Murakami and this character are large. This is important because Murakami's characters paint a picture of how he views himself and his generation in the context of society. Through this, the self-insert character becomes the embodiment of the generation of Japanese men born just after World War II, without a clear purpose other than to economically support Japan. In Murakami's early works, the unhappiness of his characters manifests as detachment, where his characters view the events and conflicts of the story from a logical and emotionally detached position. In a conversation with psychoanalyst Hayao Kawai, Murakami recognizes this detachment as a product of failed Japanese political movements in his youth. Quote, "When I think about it, during the university struggles of 1968 to 1969, I was very concerned about what I should personally make a commitment to. That time was the age of commitment for our generation, but then it got beaten down and beaten out of us, and all in an instant it turned into detachment." End quote. In this, Murakami is referring to the failed Japanese student protests of 1968 to 1969, which he experienced firsthand while studying drama at Waseda University. His denouncing of the protests in his novels, in combination with his focus on detachment, has earned him some criticism among some of his Japanese peers, as they feel he is dismissive of politics and important social movements. In his later works, however, Murakami makes a conscious shift from detachment to commitment. He recognizes this transition in how he viewed the world and society after living abroad in America during the 90s. While I argue that this shift occurs more gradually and earlier than in 1995, which I'll go into detail in the second video for this essay, it is most apparent in his 1995 novel, The Wind-Up Bird Chronicle, which explores themes of unnecessary violence as a result of Japan's invasion of Manchuria in the 1930s and during World War II. On his website, Murakami explains how he further explores commitment in the years following 1995 through a series of essays titled Underground, released in 1997. Quote, "After the Hanshin earthquake and the Tokyo subway sarin gas attacks of 1995, he, Murakami, interviewed surviving victims as well as members of the religious cult responsible. From these interviews, he published 2 nonfiction books in Japan which were selectively combined to form Underground." End quote. After the 2 major catastrophes, Murakami also incorporates themes of collective trauma into many of his stories. Despite his shift, however, his core themes of skepticism surrounding modern social systems have ultimately remained consistent. In this way, Murakami utilizes a large array of literature to craft a unique perspective on the oppressive nature of modern social systems through recurring themes around the loss of non-capital-driven lifestyles and political efficacy in economic-centric modern Japanese society. These themes are in some way present throughout all of his books, and they can be clearly seen in his pre-shift works such as A Wild Sheep Chase and Norwegian Wood, his short stories like The Elephant Vanishes, and even his post-shift releases like After Dark and Kafka on the Shore. In this video, I will explore these works to unveil the deeper messages Murakami intends to convey around the relationship between individuals and the society that they live in. Murakami's obsession with social systems begins very early in his writing career. In fact, it has been present since his very first series of books, often referred to as the Trilogy of the Rat. The Trilogy of the Rat consists of Murakami's first 3 books ever published: Hear the Wind Sing, Pinball 1973, and A Wild Sheep Chase. There's also a 4th book, Dance Dance Dance, that was written a few years later and concludes the series, but it's up to debate whether Dance 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 is actually included in the Rat Trilogy. Truthfully, I don't know why it's still referred to as the Rat Trilogy and not just called the Rat Series and they add Dance Dance Dance, but it's not that important. Murakami explains in his semi-autobiographical novel, What I Talk About When I Talk About Running, that he considers the first 2 books of the Trilogy of the Rat to be relatively underdeveloped and unreflective of his writing career, as he was still working at his jazz bar at the time and had not fully committed himself to writing. However, in his article Rethinking the Rat, Detachment, Commitment, and Haruki Murakami's Politics of Subjectivity, writer A.K. Byron points out that the Trilogy of the Rat remains a vital source of analysis when considering the development of Murakami's recurring themes, since many of these themes first appeared in these first 3 books. The theme of the oppressive social system is no exception to this. A Wild Sheep Chase, the 3rd book in the trilogy, follows the nameless narrator who refers to himself as Boku throughout the course of the novel. Yes, this is the same Boku of Murakami's nameless protagonist trend, which he actually introduces in the Rat Trilogy. Recently divorced, Boku is pulled out of his daily unfulfilling life when the secretary of a right-wing conglomerate contacts him over the image of a sheep that Boku published in his company's paper. Boku is then sent on a wild sheep chase to find where this image was taken, reconnecting him with both Japan's past and his own past involving his friend and namesake of the series, the Rat. Left mostly in the dark, Boku slowly pieces together a narrative around the malevolent power of the sheep, and the Rat's efforts to stop this power from reaching the hands of the conglomerate that sent Boku on this search in the first place. Boku finds the location of the image and says goodbye to the spirit of the Rat who killed himself a week prior, effectively killing the sheep that was residing inside him. The book ends with Boku receiving a large sum of money from the secretary that contacted him in the first place, but tossing it aside as an investment in a friend's jazz bar and returning to his mundane life. Murakami constructs this narrative to convey Boku's powerlessness in the grand scope of the events at play. Ultimately, none of Boku's actions in the story have any influence over the outcome of the plot. Instead, they force Boku to confront his discontent with the world around him and question how he should proceed given his newfound knowledge. Boku's response is one that is characteristic of Murakami's nameless narrators. Boku struggles to exert meaningful influence over his life, and despite his clear desire to defy social norms and toss aside his colorless life in search of a new one, ultimately he fails to do so. When Boku revisits his hometown in a wild sheep chase, there is a scene in which he returns to a cliffside that always had a beautiful oceanside view growing up. However, in the time that he has been gone, this view has been transformed into one of condos and suburbs built on an artificial landmass in the bay. Boku is saddened by this prioritization of pragmatic capital value, and angered by his lack of power in influencing Japan's future and values. The resulting depression that Boku feels at the end of the story is telling of Murakami's opinion around the lack of influence that individuals have on modern Japanese politics and the systems that they live in. The lack of political efficacy that Murakami's characters feel is often tied to discussions on Murakami's shift from political detachment to political commitment. Within these conversations, the concept of the Japanese word Shutaisei is a point of common discussion, as it relates to the question of political efficacy that Murakami raises through his nameless protagonist Boku and named characters in his later novels. Despite Shutaisei being a vague, ever-changing concept, the previously mentioned scholar Byron crafts a loose definition of Shutaisei as follows. Quote, Shutaisei in post-war Japanese thought was a concern with the capacity of the individual to perceive, react to, and enact change upon one's environment according to an independent definition of moral values. End quote. In this sense, Shutaisei is closely related to the Western idea of political efficacy. Murakami's narrative discussions around Shutaisei are likely influenced by the failed Onpo protests of 1959 and 1960, in which Japanese citizens resisted the establishment of US military bases on Japanese soil. It also relates to the previously mentioned student protests in 1968 and 1969 that he witnessed while studying at Waseda University. The latter of these movements is heavily criticized by Murakami in his first major hit novel, Norwegian Wood, for its lack of commitment. Toru Watanabe, the main character of Norwegian Wood, is a student studying at Waseda University when the student riots began. Despite the overblown drama, when the riots die down, Toru finds that nothing has changed and is frustrated by the lack of commitment behind the rioters. Quote, I went to the campus in September expecting to find rubble. The place was untouched. The library's books had not been carted off, the tutor's offices had not been destroyed, the student affairs offices had not been burnt to the ground. I was thunderstruck. What the hell had they been doing behind the barricades? When the strike was diffused and lecturers started up again under police occupation, the first ones to take their seats in the classroom were those assholes who had led the strike in the first place. End quote. It can be speculated that Toru expresses anger towards these self-proclaimed activists because it all feels like a pointless reenactment of the Onpo protest a decade prior. A similar criticism is expressed in Kafka on the Shore, which was released after Murakami's 1995 political shift. In the novel, a woman referred to as Miss Sayaki loses her deeply intimate boyfriend to the student protests. Despite participating in the riot, the boy was mistaken as a spy sent by the police to suppress the student riots. He is tortured and brutally murdered by the student rioters, who confessed once the riots ended shortly after. As explained by another character in the book, quote, the students confessed what they'd done and were put on trial, but since it wasn't premeditated, 2 of them were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and given short prison sentences. His death was totally pointless. End quote. The main character, Kafka, as well as Miss Sayaki, are understandably angry about the incident. But what persists within Miss Sayaki many years later is a general sense of pointlessness. In Norwegian Wood, Toru's anger towards the student protest stems from the same perceived pointlessness that Miss Sayaki feels in Kafka on the Shore. They both feel that the protests were pointless from the beginning due to a lack of political influence that students and individuals as a whole have on the systems that they operate in. Ultimately, this leads Toru to resent his peers and Miss Sayaki and Kafka to look down on the student protesters, as in both cases their actions were predetermined to fail and only hurt the innocent lives of those around them. This feeling that Murakami expresses in many of his novels is what Byron is referring to in their mention of Shutaisei and the lack thereof in modern Japanese society. It is this lack of political efficacy that drives Murakami's characters to either accept the unfulfilling system that they live in or reject it entirely. The Elephant Vanishes, one of Murakami's short stories and one that I highly recommend for those of you who don't want to commit to a full novel, echoes the discontent suffered by Murakami's characters in his other stories. Despite its short length, The Elephant Vanishes manages to reveal just as much about Murakami's views as his full-length novels. Written sometime in between 1980 and 1991, The Elephant Vanishes is part of a collection of short stories that was initially published in English in the US, only for the Japanese version to be later released in 1993. The short story carries many of the recurring themes that the Rat Trilogy introduced. The main character is a nameless middle-aged Japanese man who feels discontent with the society that he lives in. Like the Boku from A Wild Sheep Chase, the Boku from The Elephant Vanishes questions the autonomy individuals have in the politics of modern Japanese society. Where the two narratives differ, however, is in scope. A Wild Sheep Chase tackles political problems around Japan's colonial history and prioritization of economic prowess over environmental sustainability and local communal living. The Elephant Vanishes, on the other hand, directs attention to the elephant in the room, Japan's aging population. In the short story, Boku describes a series of events following an elephant from its time in a small-town zoo to becoming the town's mascot and finally vanishing into thin air with its keeper. Yes, in the story, the elephant and the keeper literally just disappear. Like, that's the only explanation we're given. The elephant grows smaller as the keeper grows larger until in a split second they disappear. Yeah, it's a Murakami book, so these things happen. As the audience is provided with further information on the incident, including Boku's own eyewitness account of the elephant and the keeper's final moments before disappearing, it becomes increasingly apparent that the elephant and the keeper are an analogy for Japan's aging population. Both the elephant and the keeper are old and no longer fit within the workforce. As such, their only form of financial contribution is by being a tourist attraction, the figurehead of the town. However, as age catches up with them, their use in this role too is exhausted, leaving them with no option but to disappear. Nobody talks about the issue of the elephant, just as nobody talks about the issue of Japan's aging population, and this is because these groups operate outside of the strict way of life allowed by capitalism. Murakami continues to call out the oppressive nature of capitalistic society in a new Kichin marketing series that Boku is tasked with selling. In his marketing speech, Boku stresses that the new Kichin series is one that is built around unity. He explains how unity is necessary for a kitchen to function efficiently, and emphasizes calling the new series the Kichin series. The company's insistence of using the Japanese kichin pronunciation of the Western word kitchen rather than the Japanese word daidokoro, which is used to refer to cooking spaces in Japanese households, parallels Japanese post-war business practices in mimicking American business. When Boku is asked for his opinion on the necessity of unity within the Kichin series, his response is as follows, quote, "A kitchen probably does need a few things more than it needs unity. But those other elements are things you can't sell, and in this pragmatic world of ours, things you can't sell don't count for much." End quote. Through Boku's dialogue, Murakami suggests that the skills valued in the economy-driven modern society of Japan are only those that bring in capital. This point is further accentuated when Boku brings up the incident with the elephant during a conversation with a woman towards the end of the story. Leading up to that point, the two had hit it off, and each seemed to be considering the other as having potential as a spouse. However, when Boku brings up the elephant, the woman explains how he suddenly stopped making sense to her. The conversation ends after Boku tells her about his final moment seeing the elephant and the strange nature of the elephant's disappearance. The incongruity Boku and the women experience when he brings up the elephant is because in doing so, Boku defies the unity within the social system they live in. Once he breaks that unity, Boku himself is no longer valued as a member of society because he interrupts the efficiency of the kitchen. Boku seems to know this throughout the story. He is hesitant to mention the elephant to the woman in the first place, and despite expressing discontent with how authorities and reporters are addressing the disappearance, he himself does not act in any way to try and remedy the issue. This is because Boku recognizes his lack of political autonomy within the massive society he lives in. He's concerned about the elephant and the keeper, just as he is concerned about the aging population of Japan. However, like Boku from Wild Sheep Chase, Kafka and misogyny from Kafka on the Shore, and Toru from Norwegian Wood, he lacks the Shutaisei to make any real change. This feeling is confirmed when he brings up the elephant to the woman, and as a result, loses his value as a potential spouse. The Elephant Vanishes ends with Boku accepting his lack of political efficacy and embracing the pragmatic world of capitalism. He sells himself well and works within the unity of the system, leading his company to financial success. However, despite participating in the unity of the system, he continues to express discontent. Quote, "Some kind of balance inside me has broken down since the elephant affair. I continue to sell refrigerators and toaster ovens and coffee makers in the pragmatic world, based on the after images I retained from that world." End quote. In choosing to live within the strict confines of life defined by capitalism, Boku remains unfulfilled and morally conflicted by the lack of concern for those who live outside of the capital-driven systems of society. So before I jump into the final section of this video, I want to talk about a major point of criticism against Murakami, and that's that he's honestly pretty shit at writing women. So, particularly in his pre-shift novels, most of the women are just plot devices used to either support the male protagonist or act as a point of fixation for him. They're rarely given any desires of their own other than to aid the protagonist who they are for some reason deeply in love with, despite the protagonist's romantic apathy and plain nature. What I'm trying to get out here is that the protagonists kind of do nothing to deserve the love from these people, right? And it kind of echoes, like, it feels to me almost like in like fantasy anime when there's a super plain protagonist that kind of does nothing to stand out and has this like harem of women chasing after him. So also the lack of the agency of these women can be kind of partially excused because none of Murakami's characters really have agency, neither male nor female. So, I mean, that's basically the entire theme of this video. But because Murakami's novels are written from the first-person perspective of a male protagonist, his male characters are still given thoughts and desires. His female characters, on the other hand, are pretty objectified. So luckily, over the years, he has gotten kind of better at this. I specifically remember like the improvement I saw from when I was reading Norwegian Wood and then went to South of the Border, West of the Sun. Because despite its commercial success, honestly, Norwegian Wood is by far my least favorite of his books, and this is partially due to the fact that the women in these books, or in this book, are particularly poorly written, and it's kind of just a disturbing portrayal, in my opinion at least. I also just didn't really enjoy the book that much, but South of the Border, West of the Sun, on the other hand, while not perfect, includes a really good scene at the end of the book that gives voice to one of the female characters that was wronged by the main character. This kind of feels almost like a self-criticism for Murakami towards himself, because the entire scene is basically the character pointing out how selfish the main character is and assuming that she has no desires of her own, and expecting her to be okay with anything he decides. Either way, the book I'm about to introduce kind of breaks away from his usual misogynistic trends, and in many ways adopts a completely unique literary standpoint for Murakami, which is very interesting. So honestly, this next section is really confusing. It could even maybe deserve a video of its own, although kind of any of these sections could get a video of their own. But this one in particular is really difficult to understand, and even like I myself, despite having done all this research and writing this script, I don't fully understand everything I'm talking about here. So I'm just hoping that I can explain it in a way that enough people can kind of get what I'm getting at here. So we'll see how I do. But Murakami's 2004 release, After Dark, discusses the loss of non-capital driven lifestyles from the perspective of gender. This is a topic rarely discussed by Murakami, and a surprising one considering his misogynistic tendencies I just explained. In many ways, After Dark breaks Murakami's usual formula. It is written in an elusive third-person point of view and follows a diverse cast, the main character being Mari Yasai, a young woman who's at the cusp of entering the adult workforce at the age of 19. In Chapter 7 of their book, Murakami Haruki and Our Age of Pilgrimage, authors Hansung and Seng focus their studies on the voyeuristic gaze, narratological construction, and the gender problem in Murakami Haruki's After Dark. Seng and Hansung dissect how Murakami utilizes the illusion of a third-person perspective in After Dark to illustrate the consumer's gaze. The third-person perspective that the reader views the story through is given a first-person pronoun, we. In this way, an argument can be made that the story is actually told in the first-person perspective through this we character, whose role is to simply observe. In supporting this argument, Hansung and Seng explain that, quote, Murakami's claim that the novel is written in the third person, then, is flawed, because they fail to consider the novel's double plot structure. The claim seems valid insofar as Mari's plotline gives the illusion of third-person narration to the effacement of we. Effacement, but not disappearance. Because of its unique mix of extra and intra-diegesis, and yes, that's a real word, After Dark cannot be accurately argued as written in the third person. The precise formula should be that it oscillates between intra-diegetic first-person narration and extra-diegetic first-person narration, end quote. In essence, the perspective of the story appears at first glance to be third-person extra-diegetic, as the story is written from the perspective of an onlooker uninvolved in the events of the story. but when it is later revealed that the onlooker plays an active role within the story, that being the observer that watches Mari's older sister, Ariasai, the perspective is recontextualized as first person and shifting between extradiegetic and intradiegetic. This newfound understanding of perspective and the observer as a character in After Dark is necessary for understanding the observer's role as society's gaze. Ariasai, once again Mariasai's sister, has spent her life appearing as those around her desire, and ultimately she resigns herself to fitting the gazes of the masses. The main character, Mariasai, in contrast, chooses not to appeal to the gaze by spending her days reading in Denny's and doing other odd hobbies during the after-dark hours of the night. However, as the book explores themes of sexual violence and feminine-targeted abuse, Mari drifts closer towards fulfilling her role within the gaze. By the end of the novel, Mari decides to continue her career path by studying abroad in Beijing and lies down next to her sister on the bed for the voyeur to watch. In studying the narrative observer's interactions with Ariasai, Hanseng and Tseng make a case for the observer being representative of the male gaze. Quote, "As a narrator cum character, we subjugate Eri under an unequal power structure by gazing at her sleep." End quote. They further expand on this concept using Mulvey's original male gaze theory of film as a basis for male gaze within the novel. Quote, "The gaze inflicted upon Ariasai undoubtedly echoes the most important contribution of Mulvey's male gaze theory, namely, that female characters are gazed at objects exposed under an unequal, multi-layered power structure of gazing for the enjoyment of men, the active controllers of the look." End quote. My interpretation expands upon Hanseng and Tseng's argument, asserting that the observer does not just represent the male gaze, but society's gaze as a whole. Society's gaze in itself is dominated by the male gaze, but not exclusive to it. I make this stark difference because of Mari's decision to study abroad in Beijing at the end of the story. The reason why Ariasai chooses to lie down for the voyeur is because she feels it is the only lifestyle that the male gaze consumer-driven society of capitalism allows her to do. In this sense, her actions are less of a choice and more of an acceptance of her predetermined role in society. In Mari's case, however, she displays a more broad sense of society's gaze, rather than just the consumer's male gaze. While she does resign herself to lie down next to her sister, she also resigns herself to further her career path with her plans to study abroad in Beijing. The male gaze would only have Mari lay down for the voyeur instead of joining the workforce. In this way, Mari's actions suggest that the strict lifestyle permitted by the male gaze-based society of consumers are one and the same as the strict lifestyles permitted by the demands of the workforce. In the end, there are both facets of economically driven modern Japanese society, the same society that causes the elephant to vanish and causes Murakami's characters to feel discontent in his other novels. Ultimately, what I've been trying to get across throughout this video is that Murakami's books consistently question the placement of individuals within modern Japanese capitalist society. Through a wide breadth of social issues discussed over many books, Murakami illustrates how economically driven societies ostracize individuals that function outside of the strict bounds of capitalism, and how this results in a loss of political efficacy and personal agency. In this video, we have established that these themes are present throughout Murakami's entire career of authorship, as seen by their presence in his early works like A Wild Sheep Chase, Norwegian Wood, and The Elephant Vanishes, as well as his later works released after his 1995 political shift, like After Dark and Kafka on the Shore. However, there is a difference in how Murakami's pre-shift and post-shift characters interact with the oppressive social system. Through this exploration, Murakami builds his own opinion of how the individual should live under such a social system. I will explore these topics in part 2 of this essay, which will be released as a second video. Furthermore, I will make the argument that instead of a sudden shift in 1995, Murakami experiences a gradual shift starting in the late 80s and developing into a climax in 1995. Lastly, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for watching this video, especially if you've watched all the way up to this point. It's a really long video, so I don't blame anyone if they can't hold their attention for like the entirety of the video. But this is my first time doing something like this, so I'm not super familiar with the processes of writing the script so it flows and it's easily understandable by an audience, and then recording the script so that it sounds decently. So there's a lot that goes into this, but I'm happy for any criticism, any comments anybody has, or if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer them in the comment section. Lastly, if anybody has any like different interpretations to some of the books or scenarios I described, I'm all open to hearing about it. I'd be curious to see if other people kind of came to similar conclusions to me about these books, or if there's entirely different ways of looking at this, which I'm sure there are. So anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.